So I wanted to talk a little bit about, dime. I know like some people are like, dime again, yeah, dime, because I think it's really important as you're handing out the books. We talk about the 7 steps. And of course, one of it is proper protection and proper risk management. And, I'm going to kind of go through how I explain it to people. Now, you may have your own way of doing things, and it's probably working wonderfully for you. And I'm not asking you to change it. When I've listened to trainings in the past, how people present different things of the business or solutions, I always just kind of think, okay, what am I doing? What are they doing? What can I maybe implement on what they're doing? Or maybe I don't want to implement anything. Okay, and that's fine. So I'll kind of go through this, and maybe you just want to take some notes on some words that I use that you may be able to implement in your presentation. But I probably need to make some changes too on mine. But I've been doing it for so long and it just continues to work. And the most important thing is that the people I'm explaining it to, and this goes for how you explain it as well, as long as they're understanding and they're taking action, then continue to do what you're doing, right? But if they're not understanding or not taking action, then there's something you're doing. Either you're too complicated or you're not thorough enough. I don't know what it is. And so sometimes in the past, when I've gone through a slump, I'll just have someone listen into my presentation and say, hey, at the end of this deal, just tell me what you think I should make changes on. Okay. So, so when it comes to, when it comes to the 7 steps and talking about building a good financial plan, and especially when I teach my Heartland classes, I always talk about, the basic foundation, or the first step to a strong foundation is having proper protection in place. And we spend a lot of money on different types of insurance, don't we? We spend a lot of money on auto insurance, but yet when we get into a car accident, if it's a minor fender bender, what do we do? Let's just settle this on our own. Let's not call the insurance company, right? Or we have cell phone insurance, but for some reason our phone just never cracks or breaks because we have a bulletproof case on it, right? But we spend money on this insurance every month. Or we have homeowners insurance, but when's the last time you filed a homeowner's claim? Okay. Fact is that we spend a lot of money on insurance. We never claim it, or we never file claims on. However, we ignore some of the most important insurance that we should have. And what is that? That's proper disability insurance. I talk a lot about disability insurance with folks and my clients, because how are they going to be able to pay for their Roth, or how are they going to be able to pay for their life insurance or all their necessities in life if they get hurt and they can't work? Right? I've always said this on whenever I'm presenting, and you guys know this, is that, my wife wouldn't marry me until I had proper disability insurance, because she's like, how is it fair if I get hurt, my income is replaced, but what about yours? Right? So, so disability insurance, life insurance, health insurance, and then what's another big one is long-term care insurance, right? And so I definitely spend quite a bit of time talking about the concept of long-term care insurance, because it's all going to come full circle when I'm going through their life insurance needs, right? So I just want to tell you, those are some of the things that I like to say when I'm talking about protection and leading into it. And I know it's not the most attractive thing to talk about. However, if a financial storm comes along, I need to make sure that this family is protected. What's the point of me talking to them about a Roth IRA or an index annuity or anything like this? Because if something happens to them prematurely, what's that really going to do for them? I don't know, right? But I know that if in the times where a client has passed away and I've delivered a death benefit check of $250,000 or $500,000, I know that made a major impact. Okay. And I'll talk about all those other things. Okay. I will definitely talk about them, but I may not talk about it till the 3rd or 4th appointment. And so I try to take a slower process when I'm working with a family, because I really want them to understand every component. Now, are they going to be able to walk around while they're on vacation and walking down the beach with their spouse and regurgitate everything I taught to? No, but I want them to feel confident about what they purchased and what they've chosen to protect themselves. Do you understand? So I never try to cram too much in a meeting. I try to keep my meetings at 45 minutes to an hour max, because beyond that, people they don't comprehend anything anymore, right? They're just like, I'm overwhelmed with information. I can't digest it all. And so then what ends up happening is they become paralyzed and they don't do anything, okay? So getting into the dime method, let me just talk to you about how I do my dime. But I do dime almost every single time, because how in the heck am I going to know how much protection to show them unless I understand what they need to protect, okay? And so so I like going through this exercise, and not everyone's dime is the same, okay? So here's how I go through it. You know, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you know, if something were, let me go through this dime method with you. If you go online, there's 1,000,001 calculators that you can go through to figure out what this is. This is a simplified approach that I like, and I think this is going to be able to pretty much cover everything. And so, you know, if something were to happen to you, is there any student loans that you'd like to pay off, personal loans, any credit cards that you're paying on right now, where, you know, if Jim passed away, Mary, what would you like to have taken care of? Well, we're a co-signer on a student loan for our child. Okay, so would you like that paid off? Yes, I would like that paid off. Okay, how much is that? And then you just write that number down. Okay, you got a car loan. Oh, I only got 2 payments left on it. Well, then maybe you don't necessarily need to put that into the dime. Okay, but we are looking to buy a new car. Okay, well, would you like that taken care of if something were to happen? Yes, I would. Well, how much are you going to spend on it? Well, then write that number down. Do you have credit cards, right? I don't know if I just mentioned that, but, you know, would you want that paid off? All right. And then another one is death expense. If something happens to you, you know, what kind of service do you think you'd like to have? Now, I do spend a little time talking about that. Why? Because that's a nice lead in into like an Everest vehicle or proper estate planning, right? What are your final wishes? What are your parents' final wishes? Do you know what their final wishes are? Is it planned? And so I never really go into depth on that stuff in that meeting, but I do make a note of it mentally, or I'll write it down in my notes that this is a conversation we need to have. Or I'll say something like, would you like to discuss that further in the future? Yes, I would like to discuss that further in the future. Okay, then mark it down. I'm telling you, note taking, mental notes, everything, it's vital, okay? Because then you just don't miss out on stuff that you could potentially taken care of. Sometimes we just get too excited and we just, you know, we try to fly through this stuff, but there's so much opportunity in this alone, okay? And then, you know, the same for the spouse. You know, do we want to have the same paid off? So it's important, okay, to ask that. You know, Jim, if Mary were to pass away, would you want the same things paid off? No, I wouldn't, Pat, because, you know what, I make X amount more, or maybe she makes more, and I think I could pay for that. Okay, then that's fine. Because here's the thing, I don't want them to be overinsured. I definitely don't want them to be underinsured, but I'm not there just to sell them a ton of insurance. I really want to dive down to like this, and get to a number here that really makes sense. Now, I jump over income a lot of times if they have a mortgage. So what I talk about on the mortgage side is simply hey, you know, you purchase this beautiful home. If Mary were to pass too soon, would you stay in this home? Yeah, I would stay in this home because, you know, my kids go to school here. They got another 8 years for, you know, grade school and high school. So by all means, I'd like to stay here. Okay. Well, you know, would you want any of the house paid off, or would you like to have a lump sum to help cover the mortgage maybe for 5-10 years? And the same goes for the spouse. Do you want it all paid off, or would you like assistance with paying it off maybe for the next 5-10 years? So if you probably need to hear this a couple times, but I'll say, okay, well, how much do we have left on the home? Oh, we have $250,000 left on the home. Okay, Mary, would you want that all paid off, or would you like half of it paid off? Would you move? Maybe you would want to downsize. I'm not sure, but you still have to purchase another home, correct? Right. Well, so I try to get to a number, either they float the mortgage for some time or they have the whole thing paid off. Okay. So, and of course, do we pay off a home necessarily when we get that death benefit check? Maybe. Or do we put it in a bank account that it feeds the mortgage so that in case that spouse needs extra money, it's not tied up into the home? Okay. Now, so then we write that number down. And then I go back to income. So assume that the debt's taken care of, all the debt and the mortgage is taken care of. What about ancillary expenses like daycare? What about, okay, so the house is paid off. What about property taxes? You know, do we want that? Do we want to, you know, supplement some income for that? Sports activities, you know. So I keep rambling stuff off to get to a number. Maybe it's like an extra $3,000 a month. Well, if it's three, whatever the number is, it doesn't matter. Whatever the number is, how long would you want that income to be replaced for? Oh, I want it, you know, some folks want it for 5 years, some want it for 10 years. There's no right or wrong answer here. Oh, okay, you want it for 10 years. So I'll take that 3 times 12. So that's $36K times 10, that's $360,000. So that means upon passing, we will take that $360K and we will put that in an account and we will withdraw, if need be, $3,000 a month. And that'll take care of you for the next 10 years without any market risk. If we only want it for 5 years, then we divide that number by 2. So whatever that number is, okay? You write that down and you confirm, does that feel right to you? Yes, it does. Okay, or no, it doesn't. Do we need to sharpen our pencil on that? Maybe we need to evaluate this one more time. And then lastly is education. Now you have to be careful here because some folks have no intention of paying for their kids' higher education, which is fine. My parents didn't. I was the last of 6 kids. Obviously, there was no money left by the time I came. Or maybe they just want their kids to have total skin in the game. I get that. So we never want to offend people because of their choices. So we just ask, okay, so if we're not paying for the education, would you like to leave a lump sum to start their life? Maybe you want them to have money set aside for a down payment on a home or to start a business or whatever it may be. And 9 times out of 10, most folks have never even thought about this. So what are they doing? Like, I don't know what to do. Well, I don't want to pay for their school. Well, then how about, would 25,000 per child feel good? 50,000 per child feel good? And so you kind of got to coach them through this. Okay. And then once you come up with the number, you make sure I try to have them take notes on this so that they can think about that number between that meeting and our next meeting. Okay. But in this scenario, the husband is at 950,000 and the wife is at 1.1 million. Now, once we have that number, how do we get there? Right? Do we get there through some supplementary insurance we already have through our employer? Or do we get there through term insurance outside of the employer or permanent insurance or maybe a blend of all 3? Okay. And I'll say that I'm not quite sure yet, but those are our 3 options generally. Okay. And if we all had $950,000 to $1 million in cash, there wouldn't be as much of a need for life insurance now, would there? But the reality is we're still saving for that, right? And the issue is that if I pass away too soon, okay, if we pass away too soon, we haven't saved enough money yet to cover those needs, right? So we need some sort of protection in place to cover that, right? Again, just like we cover our car insurance, just like we cover our home, right? Are we really covering ourselves? Okay. So once I've gone through this and spent some, adequate amount of time on it, I'll say, okay, so now we know our numbers. How do you feel about that? A lot of times people say that's a lot of money, but after you break it down, it doesn't seem like a lot. Okay. But the reality is most folks have between maybe 50 and 100,000 max. So these numbers may shock the system. Okay. So that's why you got to go. That's why I've always felt, for me, I need to go slow with this. I need to go slow. Okay. Now we get into, so the next thing that I like to do is after I've done dime, I'll say, okay, now that we know our number, and this is where I would recommend, if you're on the call right now, to just take some notes or take a screenshot of this. Now, for years, I would just write this down on a piece of paper. Now, you can but before I wrote it down, I typed it out. okay? And I just go over it and I put a piece of paper over like one side and I'd work my way down, right? And so, so here's how I explain this. So here's our options. We have a group term, right, through our employer. But when does that insurance run out? Well, obviously it runs out when we stop working there. And the reality is that most people don't pass away while they're working, okay? Or while they're working for that specific company. And you can just ask any HR manager, when's the last time you paid a death benefit? And a lot of times you just get a stare look like, I don't even remember the last time we paid one. So, but I also encourage my clients to own it and not cancel it if they do have it, because it's usually pennies on the dollar. In fact, even when my wife goes through the benefits, I always say, hey, let's just get some more insurance. It's like $2, like it's nothing, right? And they're not asking for blood work. So I always encourage people to get it if it's really low cost. Now, so here's what we write down. Term versus permanent. It doesn't matter what type of policy you bring me. When you break it down, it only comes down to two different types: term insurance or permanent insurance. Now, is there variations of term? Yes, of course there's variations of term. Is there different kinds of permanent insurance? Yes. Most people say whole life insurance. Yes, that is a type of permanent insurance, okay? Not all permanent insurance is whole life. It has evolved over the years, and it's evolved quite a bit. You know, just like the cell phone has evolved over time, so has life insurance, okay? So, but let me just give you an idea of how the two work, okay? So I'll cover up permanent and I'll just focus on term, okay? Now, you can keep this very simple or you can get quite in depth with it, okay? It really depends on who I'm talking to, but I think if you're trying to become a professional and a good financial practitioner, you should have a good understanding of each one of these lines here and what they really mean, okay? So term insurance, I love to talk about owning a home versus renting a home or renting an apartment or a condo or whatever. Is that no matter what, we need a place to live. Why? Because we need shelter from the weather, etc. And so either one of these is fine with me as long as we have something in place, okay? And at this point, I'm not quite sure what is the best scenario for you, but let me just teach you about the two. So term insurance is like renting an apartment. Now, now if we're both homeowners and I'm talking to a homeowner, when we signed a lease, how long would we sign that lease for generally? And what do people say? They'll say, I signed it for 1 year. And what happened? So you agreed to a rent to, you know, the price per month, right? And whatever included. And usually that price rent didn't change until when? Till the lease was up. And what happens? Sometimes the landlord doesn't increase the rent. Sometimes they do, okay? But most of the time they will increase it over time, won't they? All right. Now with term insurance, there is a type of term where it does go up every single year, just like renting an apartment. However, there's a really popular type that doesn't change for maybe 5, 10, 15, 20, or 30 years. Now, if you went to rent an apartment for 20 years, and let's say I was your landlord and I said, okay, you're going to pay $1,500 a month and I'm not going to increase the rent. No. Let's say the average rent is like $1,200, but I'm charging you $2,500. Why are you charging me more? Because I'm not going to increase the rent on you for 10 years. Oh, okay. Well, I plan on staying here. That's fine. Now, what do you think is going to happen in the 10th year? It's going to go through the roof, right? And you're probably going to move. All right. And so that's the same thing with term insurance. When you buy a 10, a 15, 20, 25, or 30-year term, that premium stays the same, very predictable. Okay. But once it's up, the premium is going to go up. Okay. And if they have a term policy, I'll ask them, can you bring out the policy? And you can just clearly show them, you see how this premium stays the same up until this year. And then look what happens. It goes up, right? So what's our choices? Do you continue to pay that or do you cancel it? I'm not quite sure. Okay. But that's how that works. So it's lower cost initially, but then it goes up significantly when that term is up. Now, for this call tonight, I'm not going to get into the details of how the insurance company prices that. But at another time, I would encourage you to work with your trainer to ask them, well, how does that really work? Because I think it's kind of neat how they average out the price. But I'm not going to go through that tonight. I just try to keep it simple, is that the price will go up on them once that term expires. So premium goes up over time to a point where you may just not keep it. Okay. So you spent all these years paying this premium, and then what happens? You cancel it. Now, who won the game? Who won the game? Well, both of you won. Insurance didn't have to pay out a death benefit, and you're still alive, right? But I want them to understand is that most time is that the only way that someone is going to win the term game is that if we pass away within that term period. But I also own term myself. I'm a believer in term. I'm not poo-pooing it. I just buy it. I've bought it because my insurable need is quite high, and I like having peace of mind. And it's low cost for a portion of my insurance planning. I like to have some of it term because it's low cost and it gives me peace of mind. And I just know that it's covering the what if scenario if something happens to me while I'm paying this mortgage or my kids are under my care, so to speak. Okay. The third one there is there's no equity. Okay. So like when we rent an apartment, are we building any equity whatsoever? No, we're not. Right? But we know that. And the reason why sometimes we jump into purchasing a home is because we want to build equity. So there is no equity buildup in a term type plan. And this is where a lot of times I'll get those. So why do I even own it? Because it's low cost, right? And we're buying it for peace of mind. Or maybe we're blending our insurance. Now, eventually coverage ends, right? This is simple. If you have a 70-year-old and they're looking to buy term insurance, a lot of times an insurance company will not offer them a 20-year term. There's just too much risk, right? So you may be playing the term game your whole life and it may never pay out, okay? Which for you, it may be the best scenario. I'm not quite sure. Now, if we jump over to the permanent side, this is like owning a home, okay? And when we buy a home, is there extra costs up front? Yes. I had to pay for an appraisal. I had to pay for maybe an inspection, whatever. I had to put a down payment. But I didn't mind doing that. Why? Because I was going to build equity into the property. So there may be higher cost initially, and it may go down over time. And this is, you'll cover this more in detail possibly when you're going through an illustration, which we're not going to go through tonight. But people can relate to purchasing a home where, yes, I got to put a down payment down. I got to do all these extra things, but I don't mind doing that because I'm building equity in something that I could sell for a higher price later on. Depending on how you set up your plan in a permanent option, your premium could stay consistent until you pass away, or you may be able to pay it off sooner and then have the policy pay for itself. I can get into that later, but it's very predictable. Number 3 there is that it builds equity. Now, different types of permanent plans build equity different. Some can be very aggressive, some can be very conservative, right? But what's nice about that equity is that equity can be used for different things. Like it could be withdrawn in case we get laid off and we need to get some money out. I had a call today with a client, been paying $150 for like 15 years. And he's got almost 30 G's in his IUL. And he's like, I'm out of work. I need $5,000. No problem. Right? So I like giving stories like that. Or, hey, I've been paying this thing for 20 years. I don't want to pay for it anymore. I'm retired. I don't want to pay this. Fine. You've paid enough into it where it takes care of itself, right? Or some folks use that equity as a supplement retirement. There's no right or wrong answer. It just depends on what your objectives are with your insurance. And we'll get into that more in depth. But it does build equity, which gives you options. Unlike the term, where if I lose my job and I can't make a payment, I may lose my term policy. But on a permanent plan, if there's equity there, you won't lose it. And then lastly is coverage never ends. Okay? As long as there's gas in the tank, that policy will stay in place until the day you pass away. So it's a matter of if you die, it's a matter of when you pass away. And if that's important to have something that's going to pay out for, and that was the case for my client in Tennessee, is that they want their policies as an inheritance play. They want to spend all their retirement dollars and just have their policies pay out as an inheritance. So coverage never ends. And then lastly, it's not on the page and you may want to write this down, is that lastly, if I get sick, I can have long-term care, a long-term care feature added to the plan where I can use that death benefit while I'm alive to take care of me. Instead of burning through my assets, my retirement dollars that I've saved, because the average cost for long-term care today is not between $7,500 and $8,000. Now, if you go to Alaska, it's like triple that because there's no one there to take care of you. So don't go there. to retire or get sick. But if you don't have adequate long-term care insurance, then and because the government doesn't help you unless you only have $2,000 to your name. Now, I don't go into some like 40-minute spiel about long-term care, but I just talk enough to disturb them and say, this is an issue that we need to address, and you can address it on a permanent plan. So those are the two types. Now let's get into really what is best for you based off of what we can work with on a budget standpoint. And you know what? A lot of times folks will just start off with term with me, and later on we'll add on a permanent plan, or vice versa. Maybe they're in a position where permanent is good now, and then once they start having children and taking on more responsibility, maybe we don't buy another permanent plan or increase it because you know, if it's not funded appropriately, whatever. I'm just talking to you as advisors here, or representatives, but maybe it makes just sense to just add a term plan on. So there's many times where I've done that. So then we get into you know, what different things cost based on what our dime is. So that's all I do. It's worked. I think it tends to be pretty simple. Again, whatever your method is, as long as they're understanding and they're taking action, then stick with it. If there's something I introduced to you tonight that may work for you, then implement it in practice. Now, as far as these two columns here, if you're not comfortable writing them out, just type them up and bring out a sheet and say you can take notes on your own separate piece of paper. But here's what I like to go over with you. And no one cares. As long as they're learning, that's the most important thing.